want to talk about schools. So here's where I come from. I am originally from Oregon. I grew up in a small mountain town, what was a small mountain town. I grew up in Bend, Oregon. And when I went to college, my dad had been a high school or a elementary school teacher and then a principal, and my mom was the school secretary in the local elementary school, and there's no way in hell I was going into education. So I got my degree in psychology. And as you might imagine, when I graduated, I was unemployed. So when you have a degree in psychology, you go out and look for something that sounds like psychology. So I moved to Portland looking for work. There were all these ads in the paper for residential treatment counselors. I went and applied for one of those jobs because it said qualifications, 4-year degree. That was me, psychology, 4-year degree. I applied for that job. They hired me during the interview. My first job out of college was working with 54 adjudicated adolescent boys in inner city Portland in a lockdown facility. I don't know anything about anything in this institution. I know nothing. I've got a degree in psychology, which I found was completely worthless for that. So I go in and I step into this institution. The kids are as big or bigger than me. I'm only 22. They're as old as 17, so they're not that much younger than me. I have no idea what to do, but here's the special part about working in a place like that. The ratio of adults to kids is really good. 4 kids to 1 adult whenever you're online. And the beauty of that is you get to watch adults do the things and learn how to do it. So I don't know what to do when a kid acts out, but the other adults do, and then they would coach me. Here's why we did that. So I'm working there about 2 weeks when this giant angry kid comes over, runs by me, and turns and spits right on my chest as he walks by. And I'm thinking, I don't recall in my psych degree, I don't remember Freud ever mentioning anything like that. I don't have any idea what to do. All I know is that I am mad, and my first reaction is, I'm going to go after that kid. And the other adults stepped right in and took care of it and dealt with it. And then they came to me and said, here's why we did this. Now, if that kid would have done it, we probably would have done this, and here's why. And I was like, oh, well, this isn't a simple cookbook. You got to know your kids. But as you get experienced with this, it becomes second nature. And all of you who work in schools with kids get that a lot of the things become second nature. I've done this, I've seen that, I know what to do, and I might handle it slightly differently for different kids. So I spent 5 years there. Actually, I learned to really enjoy working with those kids. It's something that I really liked doing, and I became, I thought, good at it simply because you get a lot of practice. You walk in the door for your shift, and you're practicing from the minute you get in there. That was all great. At the end of that 5 years, I was making $900 a month. So I decided to go for the big money, and I broke down and decided to be a teacher. So I went to 1 year of alternative certification. I was alternative certified in special ed. And I thought, this is going to be awesome. Now I'll go out and work in a school with normal human beings and make the big money at the same time. Well, when you graduate with your alt cert isn't the thing everybody wants. So the jail school asked me to work there. I didn't want to, but I have no money, and so I said yes, and that's what I did. And this is what I learned about being a teacher, my first year teaching. 1, behavior management was a piece of cake. I know how to do this. I've been dealing with this for the last 5 years, every day of my life. I can manage their behavior. They sat down, they raised their hand, they did all the stuff I asked. Here's what I didn't know how to do. Teach them to read, to do math, etc. I have no idea how to teach. My alternative certification for me, which I got at Portland State University, taught me how to write an IEP and monitor an IEP, not how to teach. And the other thing that occurred to me is, when you're a teacher, you don't have a whole bunch of other adults standing around you going, oh, try this, try that. You're on your own. And those two things set me up to really believe that I wasn't doing a very good job as a teacher. So I did that for a couple of years, and I continued to just feel like all I'm doing is managing kids to sit. Which is funny, because when I first started working there, I said to my principal, there are really no curriculum or books or anything in my room. What am I supposed to teach? And he laughed and said, as long as I don't hear from you, you're doing everything you're supposed to do. The message, if nobody dies, you're doing your job. Well, that was really, I thought, not a high enough bar. So I decided to go back to school, and I ended up going back down to the University of Oregon only because that's where I'd gotten my undergrad. And I met with a guy named George Sugai, who was an assistant professor in special ed, who was talking about building something called PBIS. And I said, cool, I'll do this. So I went to school there. I got my Ph.D. in special ed with an emphasis in emotional and behavior disorders. My focus was effective instruction. What does it look like to give good instruction to kids with challenging behaviors? And that's what I want to spend a lot of my next 2 days with you all talking about. It's not always going to be, what is it like to teach 2 + 2? Because there's so much more than that. It's going to be, what does the school need to have going on to make it work for you? Where should the furniture be to make it work for you? How do you have to think about behavior management for the whole class to make it work for you? And so we're going to put all those pieces together over the next 2 days to make that work. When I got done with my PhD, I went back and taught for a couple of years because I felt like I need to do this myself. I felt like I learned how to do it, and so I wanted to go do it. So I went back and taught for a couple of years before I went into higher ed. And this is what I know about higher ed. It's way easier for me to tell you how to do this than it is to go out and do it myself. My job is easier than yours. So, this is what we know. I'm going to show you a lot of data because that's what I do. We've been collecting data on schools for the past 10 years. We go in and we sit in the classroom to collect this data. We've been in more than 10,000 classrooms across the U.S. and in other parts of the world collecting data. These are things we know. If we're in a Title I school, a poverty school, the kids in that school will get less attention and less instruction from teachers while we're watching. Period. Why? I don't know. That's what we know. Second, this one, in some of these slides, I'm doing a kind of a set of things with Australia, New Zealand, and so if behavioral is spelled wrong, it's because they spell it wrong and they ask me to change it to the wrong way when I'm there. If a kid is identified with behavior challenges, this simple. You go into a classroom and you say to the teacher, here comes a kid, watch out, he's got behavior problems. All you got to do is say that, and that kid will get less instruction and more negative feedback from the teacher, even if his or her behavior is exactly the same as everybody else. Third, we're just publishing this last piece right now. If we walk into a school and simply look at interaction between teacher and student, if the student we've identified is a male and a minority, they will get more negative interaction with the teacher, even if their behavior is the same or better than other kids. So there are three big pieces there that are problems for us. It says a lot of kids aren't getting the instruction they need, and I would argue these are three groups of people that we know have poorer outcomes. Kids from poverty, kids identified with behavior issues, and minority males. So what could we say is in common across these three groups? Well, I'm going to talk a lot more about this after this first section. But I would say one of the things we have in common across these three groups are people that believe those groups have more problems. I've already said they do. But what that is a perpetuation of a vicious circle. I believe they're going to have problems. I will watch them more closely. As I watch them more closely, I will notice more problems. As I notice more problems, I will yell at them about those problems. As I yell at them about those problems, they get mad and have more problems. And you can see where this goes. So I want to talk about breaking that cycle as we go through today. But to start with, I'm going to go to the whole school. And I'm going to talk about things we do for everybody before we start talking about smaller groups. Here's a basic logic of everything that I want us to think about. I'm going to talk to you about gambling a whole lot for the next 2 days because I think that's what we're doing. It's a gamble. But you can hedge your bet. Here is a basic tenet of what we need to consider to hedge your bet. Number one is a guy named David Berliner. So these are two people that have really influenced the way I think about this. David Berliner was the dean at Arizona State University's College of Education. And in the 1970s, he and his colleagues, Jerry Brophy and Tom Good, and Barak Rosenshine and others, did this research they called the Effective Schools Research. And what they did is they looked at thousands of schools. And then after looking at thousands and thousands of classrooms, they said, here are the things that effective teachers do more than ineffective teachers. And then David Berliner said, if you had to narrow it down to one thing, think about this. Let's say that you gave an assessment in reading to every kid in the school at the start of the year. And let's say they all are about average. Here's what I want you to think about. What if for the rest of the year you taught reading every day, but you never did any assessment? I'm not suggesting you do this, just think about what if. At the end of the year, we're going to assess them again, and you all are going to bet on which kids had the best growth. Now, if you were really smart, you'd say, I want to see their assessments during the year, and the ones that are on a good trajectory, that's who I'd bet on. If you've got one data point, you got no trajectory. What would you use to bet if they're all about the same and you want to know who had the most growth at the end of the year? And what David Berliner has said is, and this will sound really simple when I say it this way, I would bet on the kids that were paying attention the most during reading instruction. We're going to call that engagement. Now there's passive engagement, staring at you, and there's active engagement, doing things. What David Berliner has said is that connection between kid engagement with instruction and achievement is the biggest thing we've got in all of education. If you work in education, this should be your foundation. He says it way more powerfully than that. He says, we should say in education that engagement is our foundation for achievement with the same scientific status that biology would say homeostasis, or psychology would say reinforcement, or physics would say gravity. It's a fact. It's a foundation. We have to create engagement if you want to have achievement. Now, my first thought when I see that is, I totally agree. How could you be achieving if you're not paying attention, don't have any idea what we're doing, and are thinking about something else while we're teaching? Here's the second thing I think of. I remember a lot of kids in my classrooms and places I worked that didn't want to be engaged. And so how do you engage the unengageable? I don't know exactly how to answer that except to say we've got a bag of tricks we're going to talk about for the next 2 days. But here's what Bob Pianta says. Bob Pianta is currently the dean at the Curry School of Education at the University of Virginia. He's very famous for his research on teacher-student relationships. And this is what Bob Pianta says. You have to take responsibility for that relationship as the adult. If it's not working, you have to change what you're doing because the kids won't. So, what do we have to do to make that work? And what his research shows is the more times an adult and a student go back and forth in a classroom in a positive manner, the higher the achievement. So I've asked him, what do you mean by positive? And here's the answer. Not negative. As long as you and I, how's it going? Good. That counts. Did you watch that on TV tonight? Yes. That counts. Everything that happens that isn't me telling you to stop, do it different, is a positive exchange. And what he has shown in his research is, if the adult doesn't initiate and do something to sustain that positive, it won't happen. There are a lot of kids who you know that don't come into the classroom looking to have a happy conversation with you. The longer they go without having that positive conversation, the harder it will be for you to make a positive conversation. So, as Bob Pianta says, it is incumbent upon us to figure out a way to make that happen. And this will be a tenet of everything I'm going to talk about. Responsibility. Adult responsibility. It isn't easy, but there are things that we are responsible for doing, and it feels like we shouldn't be responsible because that kid is a real pain. It's still our responsibility to figure out what I can do to make it work. So this is kind of my scary war story of this not happening. When I first moved to Kentucky, this is my 11th year at Louisville. So 11 years ago, when I first got there, they asked me if I would go visit a school in far western part of Kentucky, a high school. And they said 55% of the kids in this school are failing at least one class. We'd like you to go talk to them about PBIS. Well, I don't know that those things really go together completely, but okay, I want to play nice with the Department of Ed. I'm brand new. So I drive clear across the state. I walk into this school. It's a room probably not even this big. And they just lead me into this podium, and all the faculty of this school, high school, are in there. And they say, talk to them. I started to talk, and I realized the people in the front row had their backs turned to me. And I thought, is this like, are you doing a circle or something? Or are you having a discussion? Then it just all of a sudden occurred to me, oh, they don't want me here. Thanks, KDE, for that invitation to come out here. So now I'm stuck in front of them. It's a hostile crowd, and I've got an hour to kill. So I swallow hard, and I just say, hey, I was just asked to come here to look at predictability. I understand you've got a lot of kids that are failing, and I wondered if it's predictable. So I started with this question. If you were to say this was the first day of school and we were going to bet on which kids were going to get an F in your class, what would you use for that bet? Could you tell me on the first day which kids were highly likely to fail? And there was a really long, uncomfortable silence. And then somebody said, yeah, kids that come unprepared fail. And I jumped all over this because I've got nothing else to jump on. Great! That's great. So we know that kids that come unprepared are more likely to fail. I wonder why that is. Why would that be? What's the common thing? And there was some silence again, and then some people said, because they don't get any work done when they're here if they don't have materials. And there was a couple of examples, and then one guy said, yeah, if we're having a test and a kid doesn't bring a pencil, they get a 0 on the test. Everybody agreed, and I thought, well, this was a long drive for a really simple solution. Said, what if we found a way to get them a pencil during that test? And they exploded with anger at me. Even the people in the front row turned to yell at me about, we're teaching responsibility. We're not giving pencils. And I always would love to say that I had these really smart-ass, cool remarks back to that. There was kind of a lynchy feel in the room, so all I did was say, all right, I get that. Here's what I would like to have said. And how's that working for you so far? Or when they say, we're teaching responsibility, I wish I could have said, no, you're not. If you were, they'd be bringing a pencil. But what I had to say instead was, so right now, you're asking them to bring a pencil, and they don't. So what are you doing now? And it got real silent again. Like, right. What if we were talking about 2 plus 2 equals 4, and you'd have said, we've told them at the start of the year 2 plus 2 is 4, and some of them are still saying 5. And I said to you, what are you doing? Waiting for them to say 4. You'd say, that's ridiculous. If they're not doing it right, teachers teach. That didn't go over well at all with them, any of that logic. So I told them this. When I got out of my Ph.D. program, I went back and I taught. As I said, I was a teacher in a self-contained EBD room in a high school. My kids did not bring pencils, even though I implored them to. Here was my strategy. You walk in my room, hey, how's it going? Do you have a pencil? Nope. Great, give me a shoe. We trade. You get pencil, I get your shoe. At the end, we trade back, and I've never lost a pencil. I think what they were thinking is I was saying, you should just spend a ton of money on pencils and just hand them out to everybody. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying this. If I told you I'd give you each one $10,000 bonus on your paycheck if the kids in your room remembered to bring their own pencil, I bet there'd be another strategy. To simply say, we told them, we're done, doesn't work very well. The bet, if you're making a bet on I'll wait them out and they'll eventually be successful, is a really bad bet. What we have to figure out is, how do I get them to do the right thing without doing it for them? That's the hard part, and that's a set of tricks. But it's also inherent in effective instruction. How do you set the kids up to be successful and give them credit for it? And make them keep doing it with less and less of you until they don't need you at all. That's what education is all about. So if it's not working, we've got to change. It's not our fault. And there are some things we shouldn't do. But if it's not working, you got to do something different. The big idea there, as stated always, is kid behavior won't change until adult behavior changes. If I say what's 2 plus 2 and the kid says 5, they're going to keep saying 5 unless I teach that differently in some way. It's not my fault that they said 5. It's my responsibility. But again, what we've got to figure out is, how do we separate my responsibility for making you successful with your responsibility for giving some effort? And that's a tricky place to go. And that's what we'll spend a lot of our time thinking about. So here's a way to start thinking about why that's important. This represents every kid in the universe in school. It could be every kid in your school. It's a normal curve. If you assess everybody on any particular thing, it'll fall out about like this. About 2/3 of your kids are within 1 standard deviation of the mean. They're average. 2/3 of your kids are average kids. On both sides of the mean, you've got kids in smaller proportions that are better or worse. Up here, between 1 and 2 standard deviations from the mean, you've got kids that really don't ever have problem behaviors and that probably get A's and B's all the time. It's about 14%. About 2% of your kids, more than 2 standard deviations from the mean, are straight A, never had a problem, annoying kind of smart kids. On the other end here, between 1 and 2 standard deviations from the mean, and if you were looking at this in terms of reading, or math, or writing, or behavior, being between 1 and 2 standard deviations below average is a kid that we would consider to be at risk for lifelong failure, very early in time. For instance, at 4th grade, a kid who is identified as a poor reader in 4th grade, not a non-reader, a poor reader. At 4th grade, a poor reader, the probability of them being a poor reader for the rest of their life, no matter what we do, 0.88. Almost 90% chance you're going to be a poor reader forever if you're a poor reader at 4th grade. We know that these things don't change a whole lot. If you show somebody on this curve, they don't move a bunch unless you can find them before they move. I'll make that point more clear in a second. Down here at the bottom, you've got your kids in crisis. Now, if we're talking about reading or math or writing, you'd know this kid if they were in your room. If we're talking about behavior, you know this kid even if they're not in your room. You know the kids that are 2 standard deviations different from everybody else. About 2% of your kids have major behavior issues. However, those kids diverge into internalizing and externalizing. The internalizing ones you probably don't know unless they're in your room because they're quiet. They sit with their hood over their head and don't talk to anybody. The externalizers, oh, you know them well. They come and find you if you're not looking for them. They're there. Now here's what we want to ask. How predictable is it that where you are on this curve will be an indicator of where you'll be in the future? A couple of things. One, it depends on how long you've been there, and it depends upon how far you are down the slope of that curve. For instance, we talked about reading here. We've got even better indicators for behavior. What we know is that show me a kid at 3 years old. At 3 years old, if that kid is 2 standard deviations behind their peers in 2 things. Pre-literacy, they don't know that words are made up of sounds, that books are made up of words. And their behavior is significantly different, as judged by something like the systematic screening for behavior disorders. Right now, at 3 years old, if you can't get that kid's assessment in those 2 areas to creep back up into this area by 2nd grade, at 2nd grade, that kid is statistically more likely to go to jail than to graduate from high school. Very early, we can predict where kids are going to be based upon specific failures on that curve. So to make that obvious to you, I'm going to make this more fun. Normal curves aren't fun. Snow hills are fun. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to turn that normal curve into a snow hill. I'm going to come to your school and I'm going to pick a kid at random from your roll book. If I said to you, I'm coming to your school, I'm just going to stick my hand in your roll book and go, random kid. The average kid is who I'm likely to pick. There are more average kids than there are anybody else. So let's say I pick the average kid, and that average kid is the exact average. We'll represent him or her by a snowball at the top of that hill. Now, here's what we want to know. Is that snowball likely to go one way or the other on that hill? Here's what we know about nature. Snowballs don't sit still when they're perched on top of a little point like that. They tend to move. So once it starts to move, what do we know about its movement? If you thought at all about Newton's first law of motion, once that starts to move, it's going to continue to move until somebody stops it. What do we know about a snowball that rolls down a hill? It gets bigger. It gets heavier, which makes it roll faster. I believe this is Newton's second or third law. Snowballs that roll downhill will roll downhill faster and bigger the longer they go, which means a snowball rolling in one direction or the other is either really good or really bad. And we've got to do something to continue it in the right way or to stop it in the wrong way. So here's what we do. We say, how do we as adults impact that snowball? So here we are on the very first day of school. And the very first day of school, she comes walking in and I see her. I'm going to go over and I'm going to kick her snowball. I want to kick it that way. That's the success way. So I catch her at the door. Great that you're here today. Good job. Thanks for coming on in. Did you know we walk in the hall here? We do. We always walk to respect people. Come with me. Hey, you're a great walker. Thanks for walking. That's some of the best walking I've seen all year. I want you to be the model for our whole school because you're such a great walker. Now she's walking around now going, damn, I'm a good walker. I didn't even know there was such a thing, but I happen to be really good at this. Here's what we know. When I kicked her snowball to the right, it got bigger. It got heavier. And you know what that means? It's more likely to continue in that direction. This is the fact. Every single time a kid is successful with anything you ask them to do in school, statistically increases the probability they'll do it again. Anything. So, every time I do something as an adult in this school that sets you up to do it right is a predictor for it happening again. Now, if I only do that to you once, how big is the predictor? Not very big, but it's there. Well, what if I could get you to do it again and again and again? And every time you do it, the predictor gets bigger. Here's the logic for you. I'm coming to your school tomorrow. I want to watch a kid all day long have nothing but success. If the kid I watch tomorrow is successful the whole day, every adult in your school gets $5,000 cash. Can I pick the kid or do you want to? Which kid are you going to pick? He's had 12 successes this year. He could have one number 13 tomorrow. She's had 20 successes this year. She could have 21 tomorrow. She's had 50. She could have 51 tomorrow. Which one is most likely to have one tomorrow? 50 is more likely to have 51 than 12 is to have 13. Every success is a better predictor for another. Question is, how many successes do you have to have before I get to stop setting you up to have those successes? There's a couple of answers to that. One is, it depends on how many failures you've been having at the same time. And the other one is, it depends on how old you are and how far advanced you are and able to be independent. Well, let's take a look at those things. So as you keep going, you get more and more successes. And the more you get success, the bigger your snowball gets. And the bigger your snowball gets, the faster it rolls. And the faster it rolls, the less anybody could do anything to stop it. Why would you want to stop kids being successful? But there's a point where it's not about stopping it. It's about, I don't need to worry about it anymore. I would bet everybody in this room, when they get up in the morning, the first thing you do is read your phone. And when you read it, how often does somebody say to you, hey, good reading, nice sounding out those words? They don't because they don't need to. You're successful, you're confident, and you're independent. You know how you got that? Up here at the top, a teacher said to you, good reading, nice job sounding out that word. And they said that over and over to you and made your snowball roll. But as your snowball got bigger and bigger, knowing that you were doing it right became the thing that made it roll. You don't need to keep saying you did that right forever. You need to say it often enough to make them believe in themselves and keep doing it. But it can't go forever or it wouldn't make any sense. So we have to do something to make the snowball roll. But then we've got to figure out a way to back out as we go and let them take over. And the best way to let kids take over and internalize all that is to create higher rates of success. The higher rate of success you have, the more confident, the higher your self-esteem, the more you like the subject matter, etc. A big component of effective instruction is high rates of success. What do I have to do to make that happen? Now, I have been in schools where people have said this. I think it's ridiculous that we should worry about kids walking in the hall. They're old enough to know to walk in the hall. I'm not telling anybody to walk in the hall, but if they're not, we'll teach them a lesson about walking in the hall. Now, this is what it looks like on the first day of school. She comes in and she is really excited to be here. Brand new school, she's excited, a new school year, and she comes running in all excited. I'm going to squash that. Hey, we do not run in the hall here. We walk. I'm going to be keeping an eye on you this year because I have a feeling you're a runner. On the very first day of school, a snowball took off in the wrong direction. Two things. One, what should I have done? Should I have just said, oh, I hate to be mean, go ahead and run? No, if somebody does it wrong, you've got to correct it. That wasn't a correction that I did, though. But second, think back. How do we stop that snowball from rolling in that direction? Stop the behavior from happening in the first place. It doesn't work 100% because nothing ever does. But my first thought should have been, where might kids fail today? I'll bet there'll be some that run in the hall. What could I do to make that not happen? I'm going to meet them at the door and remind them so I can say thank you. Make a snowball roll to the right instead of the left. What do you have to do in your school on a daily basis to genuinely set kids up to do it right so that you can legitimately say, you did that right, thank you. You set them up, but you give them the credit for it. That's what teachers do to be effective. Our problem, though, is this. Once that snowball has started rolling left, it's got speed, it's got mass, it's going to keep going. Unless an adult does something. If an adult doesn't do something to that snowball, it will continue to roll. Newton's first law. An object moving through space is not going to change unless something changes it. Okay, here's an object moving through space. We know where it's going. Every single time a kid fails with anything you ask them to do in school, statistically increases the probability of another failure. Just like with success. It's exactly the same statistic. So I could say it like this. I'm coming to your school tomorrow. I want to see a kid misbehave. If the kid I'm watching misbehaves, you all get $5,000 in cash. Can I pick the kid or do you want to? Now, if this is all one school, you are all thinking of the same kid right now. You know who that predictor is. And I could say, well, why'd you pick him? Because he's had 1,500 failures so far this year. Yeah, but he's had 10. He could have number 11 tomorrow. He could, but there's $5,000 in cash riding on this. It's way more likely it's going to happen there. It's predictable. Success predicts success. Failure predicts failure. Well, now this raises an interesting question. How much success do you need to have relative to the inevitable failures to make this work? Is 1-to-1 enough? If you have a success and a failure and a success and a failure, what would we predict happen? Actually, what we predict happen is if the snowball stays right there in the middle, it's real precarious, that it can take off rolling at any time and go really fast the wrong way. So this is what the data say. The best predictor we've got of inoculating people against snowballs that roll left is 4 rolls to the right. 80% success rates. 4 positives for every negative experience within the curriculum is an inoculation against the failures that are inevitable. But if you fail 5 or 6 times in a row and never got it right, you're going to say, screw this. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm not good at this. I hate this. This is stupid. I wonder if a good 4-letter word here would let me get out of this. And it does. That's where it goes. So, we have to constantly think, how do I create my instruction to set kids up to be more successful than they're not at a rate of 80%? That sounds so simple, but it's not, and here's why. Because once they aren't getting 80%, you need more than 80%. If you're talking about kids with behavior problems, here's what we know. The average kid that comes into school who has been identified, even if it's not special ed, identified as having challenging behaviors, that kid typically fails 12 out of 13 things they're asked to do during the day. What if that was you? What if you went to work in the morning and your boss gave you 13 tasks? And you failed 12 of them. And your boss yelled at you. And your coworkers sneered and laughed at you. And let's throw this in there. You're not getting paid to go to this job in the first place. Would you have any incentive to just flip off your boss so he'd send you home to watch TV for the same salary? That's what happens with those kids. For us, the challenge is this. Once we've identified a kid down here, the data say you're going to have to not just stop that snowball from rolling, and it's getting heavy, you're going to have to roll it back up the hill. That's really heavy. And what that equals, the data tell us, once a snowball has rolled more than a standard deviation to the left, it will take about 14 to 1 positives to negatives to bring it back. That's some challenging teaching when you're dealing with a kid who doesn't want to be there anymore anyway. Think 4 to 1 is hard at the top of the... It's not. 14 to 1 when you're halfway down is really hard. And I basically spent my career with kids at that point and further down. I wish that I could say, I used to be when I'd say, oh, I work in residential treatment, people go, oh, that must be so rewarding. And I think, clearly, you've never been in residential treatment. No, it's not like, oh, these successes, these kids are coming out of here and being doctors and lawyers, and it's all... If you could, out of all the kids I know, if you can think of a handful that truly made it, you feel really good about that. In fact, once you get to the bottom of the hill here, we don't believe you can make a difference. Now, that's a harsh thing to say, but we treat it like this in my field. Once we've identified a kid down at the bottom of the hill, like you are 2 standard deviations different from everybody, by the time you get out of late elementary school, we in my field of behavior disorders would say, treat that like diabetes. It's never going to leave, but you've got to figure out how to teach them to manage it. Well, this is preventable, like diabetes. Don't let the snowball get that far down the hill. Now, that's an easy thing to say, and no matter what you do, there will be kids whose snowballs end up there. That's just, there are some kids that are beyond what we can deal with, but a lot we can do something about. We have to figure out how to build schools that force snowballs to roll to the right instead of the left. We also need to find kids whose snowballs are rolling left and push them back in this area. We're not good at that in schools. You know what we're really good at? Finding kids about right here who are driving me completely nuts. And people say, well, you need to nip that in the bud. First of all, too late. It's blooming. Second of all, nipping it in the bud doesn't kill it. It'll grow another bud. It's more effective to pull it out at the roots. Don't let it get started in the first place. How do you build a school where kid failure is far less likely? And likely is the key word. We're gambling. This is all a gamble. What should we do to make kids be successful? There are a million things you could do. However, some things are better than others. If I said to you, if that kid is successful this year in school, you get $1 million. There are some things you'd want the people in that school to do, and others you'd say, not so much of that. Some things we know work better than others. We've got the data. In fact, a lot of this, we've had the data for 50 years. We just don't do much with it. Nobody pays attention. But I'm going to spend the next 2 days talking about gambling. What if you were gambling your own money? What are the things that would give you the best chance of winning that bet? So I think we need to be thinking like this. What things would move snowballs the farthest? That's what I want to use. If I've got 2 possibilities, one moves a snowball this far and one moves a snowball this far, I would be foolish to use the one that moved it a smaller amount. 2 things I could do, one works great, one works less. Why would I use the one that didn't work the best? That's a rhetorical question. In education, all over the place, we use things that are less effective than other things for a variety of reasons. What we really want to know is what things give us the best chance and what things move it the most. So let's go back to our normal curve to make this. What we really want to know is, if I give you an intervention for reading or math or writing or behavior or anything else, what I'd like to see is you pick up from where you are on that curve and move this way. What we could do is we could compare all the interventions we have by how far would we predict they'll move somebody in that direction based on research. That's not what we do in education, or haven't anyway for a long time. This is what we do in education. We draw a line somewhere arbitrarily in the sand and we say, anybody who can do a study and show that kids have improved above this line, you're an evidence-based practice. There's the term. Evidence-based practice. I'm a researcher by trade. That's what I do. I work on evidence-based practice. You know what I hate? The term evidence-based practice, because it doesn't mean anything. Here's an example. I've decided that if you can run a 10K in less than 4 hours, you're an evidence-based runner. On my way in this morning, I laid a bunch of orange cones out around the campus and down through the town and back. It runs a 10K. When I say go, I want you all to run. If you're back here by 2 p.m., you're an evidence-based runner. Go. So you all get up and start running. Some of you are back here in an hour. Great job. A big group of you came back in 2 hours. A bunch of walkers started showing up around 2.5, 3 hours. And there were a few people that just, I don't know what you were doing, but you wandered back in right at 2. And a bunch of you never came back at all for whatever reason. But right at 2, I shut the door and said, okay, evidence-based runners. Now somebody tomorrow morning comes to me and says, you know, I'm running a relay race with a $1 million first prize. I need a really good runner. And I said, pick any one of them. But all of you that are here would be going, wait a minute. Just because you called us evidence-based based upon this line, some of us are way better than others. Yeah, but as long as you're using an evidence-based runner, we're all good. You'd realize very quickly that's insane. Why not tell me which one was the best? We know those answers. We do know that. We can say, how far is that likely to move somebody on this curve? You know how you do this? It's really complicated, but it's been done. Go out and find every study that has ever been done on any topic. So let's say something like giving positive verbal feedback to kids. Okay, there are thousands of studies on that. I keep hearing people say, the research says that's bad for kids. Okay, well, show me the data. There are 2 such studies that say something like that. How many are there that say it works well? Like 10,000, okay? Take all of the studies, the 10,000 and the 2, put them all in one big pot and say, build a normal curve out of all those kids. There's a normal curve. Here's the next question. Out of all of those thousands of studies, what was the average amount of movement on this curve? We can get that, and when you get that, first of all, this is called meta-analysis to do this. It's an analysis of analyses, and what you get out of it is something called an effect size. How big of an effect should we expect by doing this? Now, if you do that, you can compare. They're all evidence-based practices. Great. Which ones have the biggest effect? An effect size is a measure of standard deviation. So an effect size of 1 means the average kid getting this would move a full standard deviation on that curve. Having an effect size of 1 is gigantic. That's not something we see very often. Here's what we do see. This comes to us from, anybody here familiar with John Hattie, the work of John Hattie? Good, nobody. So John Hattie did these meta-analyses, thousands of meta-analyses. And here's what he said. The average kid in the average school, assess them on anything and everything at the start of the year, assess them on anything and everything at the end of the year. The average kid, simply by being in school, grows 40% of a standard deviation. Now that's interesting because it tells us what we would expect if we don't do anything different. And this is the brilliance of John Hattie's work is, if we know that a kid's going to grow that much just by being in school, then what we're looking for are interventions bigger than that. If you go and pull out an intervention that's evidence-based that has an effect size of 0.3, you might as well have not done it, because you're not going to get any bigger effect than you'd get by not doing it. Simple maturation gives you that much. So really, something with an effect size of 0.3 is not working at all. John Hattie's book is called Visible Learning. And the real part of visible is any effect that you get that's less than 0.4 will be invisible. So he's gone through and found, like I said, tens, hundreds of thousands of studies and done these meta-analyses. And in his book, he creates little barometers for things, which you're going to see over and over from me for the next 2 days. They're from his work. And he simply says, what we're looking for is it above 0.4? If it's above 0.4, it's good. You're going to get a bigger impact than you'd get by not doing it. But that's not enough information. I also want to know, is there something else that would give us a bigger effect? So if someone says, I've got a great thing here, it has an effect size of 0.6, should we do it? I say 0.6 is great. My question is there anything out there bigger than 0.6? That's what we don't do in education. We don't say, but is there something better? We just go evidence-based. Is there something better? So what we need to be looking at is relative effects. What I find really interesting about John Hattie's work, because this was published within the last, I think this was a 2009 or 10, this book here, Handbook of Research on Teaching, published in the early 80s based on research done in the 1970s. Brophy and Good, Berliner, Rosenshine. And what that book gives us is a list of things that they observed were effective practices by observing thousands of classrooms. The list of things in that book from the early 80s is exactly the same as the list of things that John Hattie has identified empirically. In other words, there's nothing new in John Hattie's book, other than he can give you an exact figure for how big the effect is. Good instruction is still good instruction. Nothing's changed. What we know about what works for teaching and learning, we've known since the 1970s. Really, we have no new information about things that do or don't work. What we have to do is we have to figure out how to use those things as part of what we do. So here's an equation to use in doing that. Let A equal all the kids, let's just make it your classroom. All the kids you know. They're unique. They come from a certain background and culture and things they like and don't like and skills and deficits and size and shape and personalities. And you want them to do C. C could be real simple. I want them to say 4 if they see a 2 plus a 2. Or C could be, I want them to handle a conflict without punching anybody in the throat. What's the probability that'll happen? Well, you could just go, give me an evidence-based practice. Okay, here's one. Let's say, I found this research article. It says, if you come in, and you can find a research article on anything, believe me. This research article I found says, if you come into your school every morning 5 minutes early and think happy thoughts about your kids, they do way better. I love that one because it's easy to do. Now, I've got a research article to support it. My question would be, what's the probability that that research article that you saw is going to give us a bigger effect than these other things we've got? Probability is what we're looking at here. There are a million things that might work. Which one gives you your best chance? If you were betting $1 million of your own money on this working, would you go, that one looks easy? Or would you say, I want the one that's going to give me the biggest effect, the quickest, with the most probability? Again, you'd be foolish not to do that. So what we're looking for is not, could it work? What's the probability that it would work? And is there something with a higher probability? We'll just cut right to the end here and say, here are all the things. The list of things right here, when put together, is the highest probability known to humanity. There isn't anything we know of that's bigger in terms of probability for changing academic or social behavior than this set of things together. Not one of them, together. In my area, behavior, this set of things has a far bigger effect size on behavior than medication or psychotherapy. That doesn't mean we should never have medication or psychotherapy. It means this is our foundation. This is our don't let it take root in the first place. Medication and psychotherapy might be better at nipping it in the bud. Let's not let it bud. Let's make it be successful right from the beginning. Start with, be explicit. Tell them exactly what it is we're teaching. Why is this important for you? What are we doing? What do you need to be able to do? Model it, demonstrate it, interact with the kids to do it. It must be a personal back and forth to get the effect. Engagement is part of that. You can model in a non-engaging way, it's not as good. So again, it's not about doing one or two of these, it's all of them. If you model with your monotone voice, now watch me try this, and nobody's paying attention, modeling gives you no effect. But if you can model in a way, why do you think I'm doing it this way? Watch this, what do you think will happen next? Have you ever done? If you can get kids engaged during your model, that makes the modeling work. All of these things have to be there to get that giant effect. Set goals and give kids feedback on how they're moving toward the goal. Be consistent with what you teach, how you teach, and what you do on a regular basis. Guide practice. Don't teach and then say, now you do it. Teach and then do it with them and back out slowly. Build success to failure ratios that are really high is what that one means. Be near to kids. Engage with them personally. Walk by them. Talk to them one-on-one. Be proximal. Don't give them a ton of practice all at one time. The research shows us that a bunch of practice all at one time has a big effect that goes to a non-effect. Instead, small numbers of practice, high rates of success, spread out over time. If you're going to do 100 practices, break them down to 5 a day. Don't do, okay, and now you got 50 practices today and tomorrow. You get a poor effect when you try to cram them all in. Give kids feedback constantly. And our bottom one again, high rates of success to failure. How high? At least 4 to 1. It depends on who your kids are. Some kids are going to need more than that. More than 4 to 1? Yep, which means some people are going to have to do even more of this stuff to make it work. And that's the individualization. That's the differentiation part is, it's not like, and people say this all the time, well, some kids, when they don't get it, show that they don't need these things or those don't work. Actually, all the evidence we have says if these things don't work, you need to do more of those things. Maybe in a more creative way, but more of those things. You need to have extra modeling, extra proximity, extra. Those are the things that work. Those are the things that give us our best chance. If you're betting your own money, nothing gives you a better chance of winning your bet than this. So let's take that logic and apply it to school-wide PBIS. How many in here work in a school or with schools that do PBIS? How many you in here have not heard of PBIS? Okay. PBIS stands for Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports. It is a framework, not a curriculum. It is a framework for building effective instruction across the school. That's it. That's all it's about. If you apply PBIS to academics, it's not called PBIS anymore. It's called RTI, Response to Intervention. If you do both of them, we don't call it either one of them. We call it MTSS, Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. And I found there are a billion other names out there too, and it doesn't matter what we call them. Let's talk about the principles instead of the names. So here's a quick way to think about it. Whenever we talk about these tiered systems like PBIS and RTI, we build a triangle. I don't know why it became a triangle, but it works really well to do it with a triangle. The triangle represents every kid in your school. Every one of them. Green equals success. What we want is to keep all the kids in that triangle green. But what we also know is that there are kids in your school that have trouble staying green. Whether you're talking about any of these things, I'm just going to talk about behavior right now. So here's what I suggest you do. Let's say that green is dry. And what we know is there's dampness in your school and kids are beginning to rust. And as they rust and corrode, bad things happen to them. So here's what we need to do. Let's prevent rust. Let's prevent rust. Here's what we'll do. We'll get some green rust-proof paint and we'll go around your school and every area that you believe is damp, we'll paint with green rust-proof paint. Just to be safe, here's what I suggest. Line all your kids up in the hallway and paint them green. Head to toe, everywhere. Get them green. Now they all have a base of green. Green would be effective instruction. Green would be prevention. Green would be me thinking out where you're going to have problems and fixing that so it couldn't happen there. Here's what we know. Some kids are extremely prone to rust. So you're going to paint them green and paint your school green, and for some reason, some kids will rust anyway. You're going to have to find them early, because if they corrode all the way through, you can't save them. So you're going to spend your year scratching at kids, walk around picking at kids. And whenever you see some of that green paint chipping off, stop them and say, at risk for bigger problems. What do we do for them? We're going to, and we know this, in the average school, that's going to be around 15% of your kids. About 15% of your kids are going to require yellow super rust-proof paint. What is super rust-proof paint? It is extra things that we do to add on to green to make it work. Now, I thought some people that are smart are thinking, well, if this yellow paint's so great, why don't we just put yellow on everybody instead of green? Two reasons. One, yellow only works on top of a base of green because what yellow really is extra green. Second, yellow is expensive. Doing extra green is expensive. I would love to say, let's do extra stuff for every kid in the school. You just can't afford it. Unless you can double your faculty, you're not going to do that. So, to be practical, we're only going to use it where we notice flaking. Continue to scratch as you go through the year. You'll find some greens flake away later in the year and need some yellow paint. And believe it or not, some of the yellow painted kids are continuing to flake right through yellow and green. You know what they're going to need? Super deluxe rust-proof paint, which comes in red. The data tells us that somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 to 5% of your kids are going to need super deluxe rust-proof paint. Again, you might ask, if rust-proof red is so great, why don't we just put that on everybody? Man, red is really expensive. It's 1-to-1. 1-to-1 instruction is what that is. It's special ed. It's super intensive things that are expensive to do. Second, red paint doesn't come in something for everybody. It's prescription paint. You go to Lowe's and say, I'm going to paint her red, and they say, we need her prescription. What's her prescription? It's a functional assessment. Well, she has these problems in these places at these times under these conditions. We believe it's to get these things, so we're going to build this intervention like it's an individualized intervention. Everything at the top of that triangle is individualized. Here's the whole idea of PBIS. We don't want to use any red and we don't want to use any yellow. They're expensive. What we know is the better job we do of applying green, the less yellow you'll put on. When you do have to put yellow on, the better job you do of putting yellow on, the less red you'll have to put on. Which means, and this is what the data tell us, When you put PBIS in place to give good instruction and have the adults in the right places saying the right things to set kids up to be successful, we have fewer office referrals for discipline problems. When we have fewer discipline problems, the adults are freed up to do more prevention and positive things with kids. With those kids that are having problems, because it's fewer kids, they get a heavier dose. Instead of the assistant principal dealing with 300 kids a day, he or she might be dealing with 50. I can give better interventions to 50 than I can to 300, which means I apply my yellow with more depth now because we've done a good job with green. Doing yellow with depth means a lot less kids go to red. And when a lot less kids go to red, we have a lot more time to do truly individualized interventions. The whole premise of PBIS is prevention. Prevent at the primary level, prevent at the secondary level, and the third level is also prevent. But you're trying to prevent it from being a lifelong catastrophe rather than preventing it from happening once. So this is really what PBIS is. Now, I think you could build extra colors at the bottom of this triangle for kids that are gifted. You could make that green far more colorful. I think it's also possible to make each of these colors multiple. What would be the first thing we do? Okay, if that doesn't work, what would be the second thing we do? If that doesn't, so it's not as simple as that, but that's kind of where we end up. So here's a good analogy for you. I'm going to tell you a story about your school. This isn't a story about academics or behavior. This is a story about kids' health. What we know about your school this year is there's a really bad flu going around. Here's what we know about this flu. It's contagious, and your kids are catching it from one another. And it's mushrooming up. Second, you can see it coming. It's very predictable. Show me a kid with a low-grade fever in the area right around 100, a little less than 100. That's the best predictor we have of a kid who's going to have a full-blown flu. 3, if you can find that kid when their fever is right around 100 and give them liquids and vitamins in heavy doses, you can stop this flu in its tracks. But you got to get to it when its temperature is right there. If it goes higher, that won't work anymore. 4, if this fever climbs up to the 103, 104 mark, it's potentially deadly flu, and we're going to need to do brain surgery to save them. You all look very serious all of a sudden. This is all made up. None of this is real. So knowing those things, if I said to you, that's what's going on in your school. You're going to your school tomorrow. What would be your first thought of things you should do? I don't think anybody in here would be saying, we'd better buy a box of scalpels. Sounds like we're going to have some brain surgery this year. I think you'd be thinking, it's contagious. How do we keep kids from getting it? And you would do what you do best. You'd teach. So you'd teach things like wash your hands. This is life or death, so you wouldn't do this. Oh, by the way, some people are dying from the flu, so remember to wash hands. That's what we normally do, and I would say that's not instruction. That's telling. Anybody can tell kids what to do. That's not teaching. Teaching is when you tell them what to do and then do things that raise the probability of them being successful with that. Anybody walking down the street can yell at you to do something. That's not teaching. You'd say, when should we wash our hands? How long should it take? How much soap? How would you do this? Let's practice. Watch me. Let's see you do. What would you do next? Why would you do that? You teach this. It's life or death. It's that important. You do that with all of these things. Avoid touching your eyes, cough into your elbow, throw away the paper towels. And then you've got to individualize this for your school. And so here's what I'd ask you to think. What weird things would the kids in your school do that don't show up here yet that we need to also teach them about? Okay, you know the weirdness of the kids in your own school. Remember that ABC thing I just showed you? You base this somewhat upon, so I happen to know a school where a lot of licking goes on, and they're going to have to talk about that. Keep your tongue in your mouth. No licking in the school. Other schools, they don't need that. They might need something different. So here's the next question. Now that you've taught prevention, I'm not going to let this bud in the first place, ripping it out by the roots. Now that I've taught prevention, how will I know if it's working? I'm going to need, I hate this term, a universal screener. Ugh. That sounds big and scary. A universal screener. This better be really intense. What's the most accurate way we have of assessing core body temperature? Rectal thermometers is the answer to that. So here's what I'm going to suggest you do in your school. You're going to set up little booths in the hallway, and as kids come walking by, you bring them in. See, I can tell you already don't care for this whole universal screener idea. The thing is, if you're talking academics or behavior, you could build an assessment system that's so big and complicated that you'll spend your whole year collecting data instead of teaching. You've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. That's ridiculous. What we've got to think is not what was the most accurate way we have of assessing reading, math, writing, behavior, but what's the simplest way we have of getting an index that we could use to drive instruction. Simplicity is the key to all of this. Here's what I'm considering. I have a son who's 25, but I remember when he was a little kid that there was this little thing you'd paste on his forehead, and it changed colors based on heat, and you could kind of tell. Now, this is not what the hospitals use. This is not in ICU. But what if every kid in your school was wearing one of these? You could just walk down the hall and do an assessment. Good. At risk. At risk. Yellow on the forehead is at risk. I could do that simply. I want you to think. For behavior in your school, is there a thermometer you could put on someone's forehead? Everyone's forehead. It's not literally a thermometer, but what is the simplicity of, this is something we do all day while we're doing what we normally do, and we could use that as an index of finding kids that need yellow paint. So if I'm walking down the hall and see that, I can say, at risk. Going back to our flu, what do we know is really good at stopping the early flu? You've forgotten already. It's liquids and vitamins. Come on. This is life or death. I suggest that any kid sporting yellow on their forehead gets sent to the cafeteria where we force feed them chicken soup. Why chicken soup? Liquids, vitamins. Why chicken soup? It's very cheap. It's very easy. You don't need permissions. You don't need to keep data on how much chicken soup they're getting. Give them chicken soup. Pour it on them. Douse them with it. Make them have it. It's super effective, number one. And number two, it's cheap and easy. I would use as much chicken soup as you can, and I would call chicken soup, in fact, if it's that great, I'd bring it down and start giving it to everybody before they even got it. It's that cheap. What we know about that great intervention is, why are we using that intervention only when someone needs an intervention? Why not use it all the way up and down? If that doesn't work, it's just a logic. You don't go from yellow to brain surgery. There are multiple layers inside each of these colors. So I think there's a logic. Where do we go next? I don't know, maybe Tylenol. Why not use Tylenol the first step? Because Tylenol means I have to keep data. You don't just get to throw Tylenol at everybody and force feed them with Tylenol, shower them with Tylenol. You got to keep data. You're going to have parent permission. There are some kids that are allergic, yada, yada, yada. It's more intense. That's why it's further up the triangle. After that, things get even more intense. Prescription drugs, you better keep really good data, and you're going to need to involve doctors, which means we've now said this kid involves things, interventions that are bigger than the school. We need people from outside. I think of it like this. As you go up that triangle, fewer and fewer kids, think of another triangle that's going up, which is more adults, more money, more effort. We're going to spend more money and time, and if we go up that triangle, that's why we're trying not to go up. What if that doesn't work? We've tried everything we got. We did good instruction. We've got chicken soup. We've got Tylenol. We got meds. Nothing works. Should we stop using all of those things? Obviously, when you're talking flu, you don't go, oh, none of that stuff worked? Well, completely stop using liquids. Don't let that kid drink anything anymore. Get rid of all the things we know. You say, what else we got? There's a point where I'm willing to take on some things that are weird. Like those things that don't have a big effect size. Like there's people all the way along going, the first thing we do when we see the flu is we should put electrodes in their nose and try to shock it out of them. And I say, why? It's a great strategy. And I say, how do you know? It's evidence-based. Do you have the evidence? Well, I've heard that it's evidence-based. But why would we do that instead of chicken soup when we've got a ton of evidence saying chicken soup works? Because this one is new. New is not a good reason for doing it either. Does it have evidence? But when nothing else has worked, all right, I'm willing to try the electrodes. Shock it out of them. Where'd we get these electrodes? Some guy drives around the school in a car, sells them out of his trunk. And I've asked him if he's got research, and he said yes. So, okay, I'm within some parameters of reasonableness. I'm willing to use something with a smaller effect size when we get up to the top because nothing else has worked. That's logical. What's illogical are the people that were yelling for the electrodes from the very beginning. If the electrodes give us no data saying they'll work and chicken soup says 80%, it would be stupid not to do chicken soup. Now, if you want to do electrodes with the chicken soup, as long as we don't have data saying electrodes hurt anybody, I'm fine with that. I'm skeptical, though, of shocking somebody and making it work. So you have to be reasonable in how you apply this. But the bottom line for us would be high probability trumps everything. Start with highest probability. There will be kids that need the scalpel. That's just a fact of life. No matter how good a job we do of applying everything we've got, there will be that. So if this is back to behavior, that scalpel is being in a jail or a hospital setting. I have worked in those settings, and I can tell you, I am really glad that we have that scalpel. Because I've worked with kids that really need to be in that setting. I don't think that's shameful that they're there. Here's what's shameful. A lot of the kids that are in that setting are only there because none of that other stuff was available to them as they were going through school. So I don't think it's a bad thing that we've got scalpels. I think it's a good thing. I think it's a bad thing that we've got scalpel use without using the other things. And that's what we end up with. There's a lot of kids failing because they never got effective instruction right from the get-go. We waited until that snowball rolled so far down the hill that nothing really works on it. And it's very predictable from that point forward. I'm going to, between now and lunchtime, I'm just going to talk about PBIS. And I'm going to lay out to you in a very quick and simple way what PBIS should look like in a school. So if you're in a school that's doing PBIS, you can kind of judge against this. Are we doing those things? If you're not in a school doing PBIS, or if you've not heard of PBIS, think of this like, this is what it all means when you hear that. So like I had said earlier, I was a doctoral student at the University of Oregon when PBIS was kind of being put together. Back then it was called EBS, and then it turned to PBS. After a cease and desist letter from Public Broadcasting Systems, it became PBIS. All it ever was supposed to be is these four things. Predict when kids might fail with behavior. Create something specific that's aimed at preventing that thing. Get every adult in your school to do that and evaluate whether it works. That's PBIS. That's as simple as it is. It's those four things. So start with number one. I'm coming to your school tomorrow. I can only be there for 5 or 10 minutes, but I can come anytime during the day. If while I'm there I see problem behaviors, you all get $10,000. What time of day would you like me to be there, and where should I be standing? And people will tell you exactly, you need to be at our school at 10:08. You should be standing at the east end of the hallway. Looking this way, you're going to see these kids from this room doing these things. That's prediction. People that work in schools know exactly what's going to happen, likely. Now, weird things happen, but if you look at your data, your problems come from very predictable times, situations, locations, kids. What's predictable? Box 2, changing the bet. Come to your school tomorrow at 10:08. I'm going to be standing in the hallway. I'm going to be looking in the direction you said. If I see these kids and they're not having a problem, you get $20,000. If that were the case, what would you want the adults in that school to be doing tomorrow? And we're assuming you'd want to say, telling the kids what they should and shouldn't do, standing there, reminding them, maybe not letting as many kids go in that place at once. How could we change the environment to not let that happen? Instruction's always going to be the hallmark of that. Box 3 is the hard box. How will we get everybody to do that? Getting all the adults in your school to do the same thing is really hard, but it's really important. It is all about consistency. Good instruction has to be consistent. If it's not consistent, it doesn't work. What if the answer to 2 + 2 varies by day? Or what if you said, we're going to teach 2 + 2 this year, and a small group of faculty said, that's boring, let's make it 8 in our room. If kids heard 4 and 8 in different places, the instruction's not working. So let's say that we have this in my school. We've got a rule, keep your feet on the floor to respect property. And I'm a kid and I know the rule, but I make an error. So I'm walking through the school and all of a sudden I need to tie my shoe and I put my foot up on the furniture and there's an adult sitting right here and she says nothing to me. What did she just teach me? It's okay to put your feet up on the furniture in some instances, like when? Like when she's here. Now she's going to argue with me. No, I'm the reading teacher. I don't do behavior. And I always have to remind people, if you're an adult and you're in a school and you have a pulse, you're teaching behavior whether you like it or not. Now what I'm thinking about as a kid is, that keep your feet on the floor rule does not always apply. And I'm curious, where else doesn't it apply? And the only way to find out is to try it. So, what we know is, one adult in the school having a different rule than the rest of us sets kids up to have more problems, not just with them, but with others. So the next day I'm walking down the hall and I'm thinking, I don't know this teacher, she doesn't look mean. You know what would be horrible? I mean, really horrible? Find out later I could have gotten away with it and didn't do it. So, gotta give this a try. And I put it up here and she says, so, time out, stop. Is that respectful of property for your feet to be up there? No, it's not. Where should your feet be? That's right. Would you please go get a towel and come back and wipe that footprint off? So she corrected me, retaught, had me practice doing it the right way, and ended with, thanks for doing that. Remember, feet on the floor. Let me go. Nice job. Did that fix me? No. Now here's what I think. Keep your feet on the floor to respect property around her. Not around her. And I got a lot of testing to do to find out about the rest of you. She set me up to believe there are times when I can get away with this. What we want is not for kids to go out in the hallway and go, what's the rule in the hallway? I don't know who's coming. I want them to walk out in the hallway and say, it doesn't matter what day of the week it is. It doesn't matter what teacher's out here. The rule is this. And the only way you get that is if we're all on the same page. So, how do you get all the people in your school to agree? What you do, what the rule is, isn't important. It's that you have one and you're all teaching it and you're all encouraging it and you're all enforcing it. If you're not all doing that, it won't work. It's just not good instruction. It has to be consistent in order to give us that. Box 4 is it working? Think about it like this. Take every kid in your school, throw them in box 1, and shake it. Who is going to have problems? Oh, here and there with these kids. Let's do this. Let's teach this. Let's put this in place. Let's make sure that it's consistent. Everybody does it. Look at our data. Hey, here's 15% of our kids it didn't work for. What do we do with them? Take them back and throw them in box 1. Amongst our kids that are not being successful, when do they have problems? Where do they have problems? Under what conditions? Oh, then what if we layer on top of what we've been doing for the whole school these extra things for these groups of kids? We're going to do this thing, everybody gets it, but it's really only something necessary for this group. But that's what we're going to do because it's simpler to do it across the school. Everybody's got to do it. Collect your data. Here's 3% of our kids that are still having problems. What do we do with them? Here's the difference when you go through it that time. One at a time. Really time consuming. You got to take Jimmy. When does Jimmy have problems? Where does Jimmy have problems? What's going on with Jimmy? This is functional behavior assessment. Very intensive. That's going to be time consuming. But then we're going to have to build an individualized plan for Jimmy, make sure it gets put in place, and collect data on Jimmy's plan. We're just going to be doing that for as many kids as get into that third tier, which means I would prefer that kids not fail to the point where we need to have that third tier, because that's going to be really intensive for all of us. So here's what I want to do. I want to go through a set of steps with examples for implementing PBIS. First step is to build a team. The idea is that you will have one team in your school that facilitates PBIS. They don't do PBIS, the whole school does PBIS. But your team is built to represent all of the people in your school. I'd like to see teams that have a representative of the instructional assistants. Instructional assistants spend a lot of time with kids during the day. To not involve them in where are the problems, what should we do about it, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. When I build these teams in schools, I'll put everybody. I want a representative from the custodians on there. And what we're going to do is we're going to facilitate this with the school. So if you're going to get your whole school to do this, they need to know what they're buying into. Here's what they're buying into. Those 4 boxes. What is PBIS? PBIS is you telling us what you think is going wrong around here for kid failure. Everybody likes to tell you what they think is going wrong. Second, PBIS is you telling us what you think would be really simple ways to prevent that. Everybody pretty much likes that one. 3, here's the hard one. PBIS is all of us doing the same thing, even if we don't all agree on it. And here's what needs to be said right here. PBIS is not in your classroom. It will be, but it'll be your PBIS in the classroom. PBIS that we're talking about right now is for common areas. Cafeteria, hallways, restrooms, playgrounds, locker areas, bus stops. Those are areas where kids go and any teacher could come by. There has to be consistency when we're in those common areas. We're not talking about going into your room and telling you what to do in your room. 4, data will drive our decision making. If the data say what we're doing is working, we'll keep doing it. If the data say it's not working, we'll change. It won't be about who whines the most or complains the most. It's about whether it worked or didn't work. Those are our 4 things about being a PBIS school. And what we found over the years is if 80% of the people in your school agree to all of that, you're probably okay. Now, I've worked with schools where they voted and it was 49 to 51. 51 was yes. And it worked because they all just worked. I've been in schools where it was 95 yes and 5 no, and those 5% were so ornery that they screwed it up for everybody. 80%'s a rule of thumb. You got to know your school. I'm saying this seriously. I've worked with schools where their goal was to wait a year for 2 people to retire. They just said, we couldn't do this year. Those 2 people are so nasty and so powerful that they'll screw it up for all of us. I think it's a mistake to say, we don't believe it's going to work, but we're going to fire ahead with it anyway. Because if you got a bunch of people that aren't doing it, it's not PBIS. You won't see a difference, and then everybody will go, see, told you PBIS wouldn't work. Well, we didn't do it. That's why we're having that problem. So if you're going to start with this, first tell everybody what we're doing, get a consensus that this is where we want to go, and then start with box 1. Predict. Here's the simplest way to predict. I take a map of a school, I put it up on the wall. I have all of the faculty and staff at the school sitting in the room. I give everybody 2 dots. The colors are irrelevant. And I say, on that dot, I want you to write the name of the problem behavior you personally most often deal with at this school. Not what you've heard about, what you deal with. Put a time of day on there, or put a group of kids if there's a particular group of kids that's predictable. When I say go, you're going to run up and put it on the map in the place where you've seen that problem happen. Go! I give them 5 minutes to write it down. It takes 2 minutes for everybody to run up there and put it on there. So in 7 minutes, we've got predictability. In this particular school, this is from a real school, they do not need to spend a lot of time arguing about the courtyard. Not a problem. They've got a hallway issue and a giant cafeteria issue. Because this is a real school, I can tell you what these dots said. I can summarize every dot on here with basically 2 things. Loud and messy. There's a lot of different words, but that's what they all came down to. Kids are too loud in there, and I have to keep getting after them for it until I finally have to send them out, or I finally have to, and the kids are throwing food or dropping their stuff or not eating their food. It all comes down to loud, messy, maybe manners. All right? So that's what we know. We can now say, if we want to build PBIS, one of the first things we're going to need to do is build, what should kids be doing in the cafeteria? What would that look like? How will we teach it? How will we model it? How do we engage them with it? All of the pieces of effective instruction have to come back to play. Here's a high school. 2 floors, so 2 maps. Notice that they've already summarized this as hallway, stairway, restroom, and outside. So I started with the outside. If you summarize those dots, it's afternoon, smoking and fighting. Okay, so I asked them, is there an educational reason for kids to be on that back porch area? And they said, no, not really. And I said, great, then you've got a choice. Supervise it or don't let them go there. If the answer is yes, they have to be there, there's an educational reason, then you don't have a choice. More supervision out there. But because there's not a reason for them to be there, you do have the ability to make the choice of then don't let them go there. If you go through hallway, as I recall, it was moving way too fast and not moving at all were their problems. There was also, I think, a voice level and some other things. But very quickly, you can look at this and summarize. So this is back to an elementary school, and this is different from either of the ones you've just seen. But basically, we lay it out. You said lunchroom. If I read through your dots, it says when? It says on the way in and on the way out. Not really when they're in there in this particular school. A lot of times when I say who, people will say it's the boys. Or I've seen a certain grade level. I've even seen kids on the football team. But if you can say, we can predict this narrow, your prevention is way easier. Think of, I want to stop all problems in the school all day with everybody. Versus, I want to stop problems in the cafeteria at noon with this group of kids. That's a way easier thing to do. So the more you can predict this down, the easier it's going to be to prevent. What? And then the final question I ask of the whole group when we put this together is, why? Why would kids do that in that place at that time? And they'll say, because we never taught them, or because we have different sets of rules for different people, or because nobody's there, or that's stuff we can fix. Those are all things that we need to know in order to be able to fix it. In less than a half an hour, we can do all of box 1, which is totally predict what's going on in your school, who, what, when, where, why. Half an hour. Now, once that's done, we can move on and start talking about box 2. 3 parts to box 2, actually 2 parts to box 2. First part is, what do you want the kids to do? Teach them to do that. Well, we've all got to agree first. How should kids go in the hall? Okay, well, if they're going way too fast or not going at all, what would we like them to do? What's that look like? What's that sound like? What's that? We've got to teach them that, so we all have to agree. What's the definition? That's what we're going to teach. Remember, teaching involves not just what you tell the kids, but what we do to make it more likely they do that. So the second part is, what are we going to do to make that instruction work? How will we create routines that work more systematically? How do we be consistent with the routines? How do we set routines up that we believe are likely to work for us? Second part of that second part is, what about boundaries and traffic patterns and where adults are standing and how we arrange furniture? And we control all that stuff too. So what are you going to say? Where are you going to stand when you say it? All of those are things that we can play with. So what we've done is, over the years, I've realized that if you don't give schools a prompt on this, this is what will happen. You guys said restroom was a problem. What are you going to do about it? And they'll come back to me with, here are the 42 restroom rules. It's like, yeah, okay. Generally, we believe that humans, not just kids, humans, can't really grasp more than about 5 rules per context. Restroom's a context, you're going to get this down to 5. So here's what I've done to make that work better for schools, is I've said, you need to have at least one adult behavior that's going to change for every kid behavior. So when they come to me and say, here's 42 rules, I say, great, what are the 43 things you're going to do? And they go, ooh, we could probably whittle that down to 4. And here is the high school. They whittled it down to walk, appropriate language, hands, feet to self, and keep moving. 4 things they want the kids to do, and there were 6 things that they all agreed to do. So when you see these things, it's what the school agreed, not what I told them to do. They have all these discussions. They have a discussion, they vote, and they come to consensus, and they put it in writing. This is what we're going to do. Now they've got a plan for what to do. The next thing to think about then is, how are we going to roll this out to the kids? This is a part that, 1, is really important. 2, in the studies we've done, we find it's the part that's most likely to not be done, which seems odd, but what we find is a lot of schools get together in the summer, go through all of this PBIS stuff, make all their plans, and never tell the kids about any of it, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So we've said, it's got to be taught. What we've found, though, is that teaching behavior is something that we don't teach people to do when they're becoming a teacher. But it's exactly the same thing as teaching academics. Unfortunately, I think this cartoon speaks to the way we teach behavior too often. It says Miss Bent's like to go over a few of her rules on the first day of school. We continually see schools that only tell kids what not to do, which isn't good instruction. What would you think about a math teacher who said, on the board I've got 20 numbers. None of them are the answer to the question I'm asking, so memorize them. You'd say, well, why don't you just tell them how to get the right answer? Exactly. What do you want your kids to do? Be explicit. Tell them exactly what it is. Model it for them. Ask them questions and engage them with it. That's effective instruction, just like it is for academics. So when we think about that, all the pieces that we're talking about here, that's our chicken soup. When we're applying chicken soup to your school, what you're doing is making sure that you've told them exactly what it is they're supposed to do and why, that you've engaged them in that instead of told it to them, and you've worked with them to practice and given them feedback, which continues on. That's where this has to go to work. So here's a way to think about this. Think about the long-term memory as where you store all the facts and things you need to be successful in your life. Your working memory is the one that notices a problem and says, how can I solve that problem? And it goes up to your long-term memory to find the solutions. But if the solutions to the problem aren't organized up in your long-term memory, they can't be retrieved. We can teach in a way that organizes them. Let me give you the analogy. The long-term memory is like the hard drive on your computer. It's where all the information's stored. Your processor, when you ask it to do something, goes to the long-term memory, to the hard drive, and gets the stuff it needs to do something. What if I told you this? You're no longer allowed to use any folders on your computer. No folders. All documents must be sitting on the desktop. And you're not allowed to name them. We'll just number them in sequence. And I said to you, hey, remember that letter you wrote to me 3 years ago? I need that right away. And you'd go to your desktop and start sorting through 10,000 documents. At what point would you go, screw this? What's happening is we have not given you instruction in a way to organize things. This is called anchored instruction. We do this with everything we do in academics. We don't teach every word in the dictionary. We teach rules and allow those rules to organize you to solve. We don't teach every math problem you could come up with. We teach rules that allow you to solve. We don't need to teach every behavior you could ever possibly have. We should teach rules that help you solve. That's the whole idea in PBIS about building a school motto and connecting your rules to it. But that's gotten way out of control where people aren't using it correctly. What the evidence says here is, if I say to you, keep moving in the hall, and I don't say, here's why we keep moving in the hall, here's why that's important, here's what it looks like. If I just say keep moving in the hall, that's just a little blip of a random arbitrary rule that somebody yelled and it comes into my brain. I don't know where to put it because it doesn't fit with anything. What we know is that information you get that isn't connected to things is likely to be lost within 30 seconds. So there's those things, I told him yesterday to do this. I don't remember you telling me that. They don't remember because it was one more arbitrary thing bouncing around there that went right out the other ear. For kids with learning disabilities, for kids with a history of failure, this is even more pronounced. They don't believe they can keep track of it or where it belongs. They don't even try. It just goes right out. So what we have to do is anchor it. And the way we've done this, or tried to do this with PBIS, is we've tried to say, come up with some big ideas that are the motto for what you believe in your school. It's up to you to do this. So here's an example. If I said, respect yourself means keep yourself safe and learning. Okay, if I define that correctly, that covers be on time, be prepared, do your work, stay on task, all of that. If I define respect others as treat others the way you want them to treat you, that covers all peer relations. If I say respect property means treat public property and others' property the way you'd want people to treat your property, that covers vandalism, theft, borrowing, all. 3 simple rules, and I've covered every behavior a kid could have. Now here's what I need to do. I teach these 3 things at the start of the year, and we hit on those over and over. That's the motto of the school. But those are really anchors. They're folders that are sitting up in that long-term memory. Now what we need to do is fill those folders. Hey, we're getting ready to go out in the hallway. When we go in the hallway, if you're staying safe and making sure that you're safe, what kind of behavior should we have? You already know what they're going to be, because we've talked about this at school. We want them to walk. Would running keep you safe? You can run into, so what should it be? Oh, walking. That's a good one. So we'll walk in the hall because that makes sure that we're staying safe, which is respecting yourself. We're connecting it. So everybody's got a folder and they know where to put these things. Essentially what we've said for PBIS is there should be 3 to 5 rules for your entire school. Everything else is an example of the rule. Now, here's what the data have showed us. If you go in and teach kids 40 rules, and then we go into those schools and we ask kids what the rules are. So as a part of this assessment, we went, and a lot of this happened in Tampa, Florida. I'd go into a school at noon and I would just say to a kid, hey, I'm just taking a survey. What are the rules in the hallway? Better than 90% of the time that kid would say to me, no fighting? Good. Where is fighting allowed in your school? So when kids say to me, no fighting, what they're really saying is, I didn't know we had rules out here. You get a don't. You get a don't do this, which doesn't tell me they know what to do. When we went to schools that were PBIS schools, I'd go in and just capture a kid at random and ask the same question. And they would say this, oh, we stay to the right, we're quiet. And I'd say, why? Stay to the right because we want to stay safe, we don't want to. We found over and over again that in schools that had anchored their rules, kids could tell us more things and could tell us what to do. Schools that had not anchored could tell us very few things, but were very good at telling us what they shouldn't do. And I always think, if a kid tells you what they shouldn't do, the right response is, but what should you do? If I said to a kid, what's 2 plus 2? And they said, not 100, would you go, good math? No, you'd say, I know, but what is it? But when we go into schools, that's the way kids answer. Not 100. We need to make sure we're teaching them so they can answer the right way. That's what we've asked for. Now, in 1993 or 4, when we first started doing this, that's the reason we set it up that way. Then PBIS became kind of this big thing and took off all over the place. And now people have just got posters with words on them all over the place because they think if you're a PBIS school, you need to have a poster. Well, you don't, but the poster itself is not important unless you're teaching it. So we had this school in Louisville that was claiming to be a PBIS school, and there was an audit run on the school, and as part of the audit, an adult walked in and said to a kid at random, hey, do you know what are the rules here in the hallway? And the kid's answer was, I don't know, but they're on a poster over there. So what's the point? If you're not teaching them, that's what they would say to a kid, what do you know about math? Well, nothing, but it's all in the book. If you're not teaching it, there's no point to it. So we have to get back to thinking about the whole idea of the poster was to set you up to be able to have something to teach. Now, the little posters, I think, are more important. Which kid would you have draw this poster? Okay, you don't need to name names, but I would have a specific kid draw that one for 2 reasons. 1, when kids draw the posters, the other kids will look at them. 2, there's a kid that needs more engagement with that concept than other kids. Here's the opportunity. So when you're going to make a poster about what you're going to do at the sink, which kid should draw that poster? When you're going to, etc. Engage the kids back in that instruction rather than just, and I've seen people, well, what we'll do is we'll put a poster up on the wall with all 40 rules so the kids will know. 0 kids are going to read that poster. 0. Not even the weird kids are going to read the 40 rules poster. It just isn't going to happen. What you can do, excuse me, this is an elementary example, but what you can do is break that up then. You've decided this is what we're doing. What are we going to do when we're in the cafeteria? These are the things we do in the cafeteria. Why? This. Now, let's say I'm a teacher, doesn't know any of these kids. I come in and these guys are sharing lunch. And I can come in and say, even though I don't know them, I can use the same language that any other adult would. Hey, think about it. Look up there. Is it responsible to be sharing? How should we eat our lunch? Why is that responsible to eat your own? Oh, because some people have allergies. And okay, so that would be responsible. Show me being responsible. Great job. Every adult could use the same language because we've created a language for the instruction. If you do the same thing in a high school, you just put it together differently. You don't use cute little pictures and things like that, but you put it together in the same way. Respect, remember these things. Responsibility, or whatever it is for your school. And so I've got probably 100 different examples of different schools and the way they put it together. Then we've asked schools to build a matrix. The matrix is simply your curriculum for behavior. This is what we've all agreed on. We've all agreed that we're going to teach respect, and it's going to mean these things in these places. So that's what we're all going to teach our kids. First, teach them what respect is, then engage them in a discussion of what that should look like in these different places so that we've got them where we want them to be. This is not instruction. It's our curriculum. I've also had schools that will say, well, we'll build that and put it on the wall and then the kids will know. Again, 0 kids are going to come read that. You've got to take it to the kids. You've got to take them and say, so why would that be here? You've got to engage them by setting them up and then finding them doing it the right way. If I'm going to have an argument with a school about implementing PBIS, it's probably going to be about what are we going to do when they do it the right way? And there tends to be this immediate, and again, this wasn't the original intent, but this immediate thing with PBIS now that means we need to give away things. No, it doesn't. This is all we ever wanted. I just found this on the internet. I don't know where this came from, but all we ever said with PBIS is tell kids what you want them to do and acknowledge them by saying thank you when they do. That's all we ever needed. That morphed very quickly to PBIS schools have to give away things. You can, but that really isn't part of PBIS. PBIS was always just acknowledge kids, like you do during academics. Yes, that's right. Got it again. Wow, you're getting good at this. Thank you. That's all we were looking for. There are a million ways to do that. Simple acknowledgement. I want to lead you through, I think, 4 different ways to do this, starting simple and getting bigger. All of these are okay, but just realize if you could start with and end with number 1, your life would be easier. Number 1 is verbal praise. It's got an enormous effect size. In fact, of all the things that we could do as adults working with kids, there's not one other single thing that gives you a bigger effect than saying, wow, you're good, thank you, correct, good job, those kinds of things. Nothing. It is the biggest single effect we've got. 1, make it age appropriate, obviously. What you say to kindergartners, if you say to a high school kid, is going to make it work less rather than more. Second, you can make this bigger by making it specific and using a name. Instead of saying, thanks, I can say, thanks for getting seated right away. And I can say, Ann, thanks for getting seated right away. You can make it bigger just by putting specificity and name in there. It's still just, I saw you do the right thing. That's all it is. But you can build it with a relationship if you make it more personal. Mix up your superlatives. Seen the teacher that goes, good, 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 good. And nobody's listening. It's the air conditioning running in the background. Nobody hears it. Make it personal. Use a name and say different things. Wow, yes, exactly. The more you mix that up, the more it seems genuine. And that's what makes it work. It's got to seem genuine. Now, if you could get by doing nothing more than this, your life would be easy. And I do believe this. If you could really use this effectively and at the rates we'd like to see, you don't need anything else. I have never seen a school, and I'm not sure one that exists, that uses it at super high rates. I'll show you later some of the data we've collected on verbal acknowledgement in schools, but in the hallways and the common areas, it's almost non-existent. You can be a kid and go anywhere outside of a classroom for an entire week and never have a teacher say, yes, thank you, good, anything like that. So, schools don't do it. If you want to go a notch higher than this, make up privileges that already exist. Don't create new privileges. These are things that already exist. For example, this is one I reminded me of this a while back. I was doing a consultation on a kid with behavior problems. Watched him in the classroom. Great morning. The whole class gets up to go to the computer lab. When they get to the computer lab, a big argument breaks out about who gets which of the 20 identical computers. And I thought, here's a perfect example of a privilege. Everybody's going to get a computer anyway, so this is a made-up privilege. But I can say, you know what? You've had a great morning this morning. First pick on computers. Somebody's going to get the computer anyway. This wasn't something different. It was there. It presented itself to me. Think about all the times during the day when kids want something that's going to happen, and just reframe it as, here's another dose for you. If this kid hasn't had a good morning in a long time, and I've been saying, great job, great job, great job, I might want to put another layer on that. Here's a chance. It's free. And you were going to do it anyway. You're just making it contingent now. And I've got schools doing this in a million different ways. But I'd like to see it all day. Like, who wants to demonstrate the limbo? Why don't you? You've had a good... But I've got high schools that, why don't you sit at the special table at lunch, they say. And I've said to these high schools, what's special about their special table? And they said, it's called the special table. I'm like, no way, high school kids won't fall for that. Yes, they do. Maybe yours wouldn't. But again, it's the idea is, you're going to sit at a table at lunch anyway. What could we do to make that a privilege? Find ways to reinforce kids with these other layers that don't cost you anything. Third layer, make it public. Now, some kids don't want you to say, look at him. But he might want something to go home, or he might put his name on the wall of fame. These, again, are things that are basically free. How many layers can you put on reinforcement that's simply acknowledgement? We haven't spent any money. We're not giving away any tangible things. Now, I'm not speaking out against tangible things because I'm philosophically opposed to them. I'm speaking out against them because I think it's a pain in the butt to do it. All the years I ever taught, I ran a full-blown token economy in my classroom. You earned certain amounts of points for all these different things you did, and you added them up, and at the end of the day, you saved them, or you could go to the store and spend them, and I had to subtract. And I hated the token economy. If I had to teach again today in that same room, I would use a token economy because it was necessary. My question to all of you would be, does your school need a token economy? And unless you're in a lockdown setting, my answer, I'm guessing, your answer, I'm guessing, is no. So don't put something in place that's way bigger than you need. Here's my advice to you on the tickets and tokens thing. One, again, I have no problem with using them. The best reason for using tickets is that it reminds adults to acknowledge kids. What we have found is that if I say, on the way down the hall today, say 10 positive things to a kid. Right. And then I say, damn it, I told you 100 times to do this. And then I'm walking down the hall going, God, I can't figure out that kid. That's stupid. And I forget to say anything to anybody else. If I say, get rid of these 10 tickets, even if I have this, I come walking out. These are reminders to me to go, this is a total waste of tickets, though, is when people do this. This is good, tickets. Good, this is for you. Your tickets. It's a total waste because those tickets now mean nothing. The whole point of the ticket was to induce the adult to say something positive to the kid. I want, hey, I really noticed you walking in the hall. Good job, here's a ticket. We need that kind of a thing. If we don't get the verbal along with the tickets lose all of their oomph. Now you're relying on some giant prize. Second, if you do decide to use the tickets, hold them. Don't use them all day, every day for every behavior because inflation will occur. After a while, you can't come up with prizes big enough to make me still want to do that. So, instead, hold on to them. Teach kids what they are. Look at your data. When your data says you're having a bigger problem at noon outside the cafeteria with kids doing these kinds of things, reteach. What would be responsible in the hallway outside the cafeteria at noon? What would be respectful? What's that look like? How would we do that? Let's practice and then say, next week we're going to be looking for that and we've got tickets. Make your tickets give you an effect. Go, use tickets, lots of verbal feedback. Then pull the tickets back and just keep the verbals and watch your data. Use them when you need them. Also, try, if you're going to give out tickets, not giving tangible things. If your tickets are worth something, make them worth something in your curriculum. Again, it could be first pick on something. You're the one that gets to sit in the front. You can tell the lunch people what they're going to have for dessert on next week. You can figure out something you can do that's already in your curriculum rather than handing out tangibles. If it is something that you've got to hand out, it should be used up at the end of the day today. No savings accounts. Those cost you time and effort, and they're just not worth it. So what you earn today, you use today. I like this one. No homework tonight. Not at the time of your choosing. So I can pick and choose when I want to use this. Plus, if you don't say tonight, some kid's going to show up in April with a handful and go, I'm done for the year. Make them work for you, not against you. The other thing to think about is having a drawing. You can give out 1 billion tickets a day, and if you're having a drawing, you're still only having one winner. But that allows me to get rid of the inflation issue. As I can just go, that was the best thing I've seen, here's 100 tickets. It doesn't matter. It's just a better chance of winning the one thing. And that one thing, if that one thing you win is a curriculum-based thing, I really am not out any for that. This is a school in Utah, a high school. They painted a special parking place directly in front of the front doors of the school. If your ticket is drawn, you park there tomorrow. So I have 2 questions for them. My first question was, what if you don't drive? And they said, not a problem. They sell them to kids that do. Okay, that wouldn't have not been my idea, but okay. Second question, is it working? They said, you would not believe the behavior we've got in hallways because everybody wants those tickets. They're so valuable. They're giving it away for a privilege that exists. Somebody's going to park there. This is free. Make it work for you. So all of the things with the tickets and the tokens, I think there are legitimate reasons for them to be used. And again, it's not a philosophical issue with me. It's a practicality. Don't do more than you need to get what you want. Make it work for you in the simplest way possible. On the other side of that is, what are we going to do when they do it wrong? You got to do something. Sometimes people misunderstand that whole positive to negative thing. And they think one great way to get the positives up is never to use negatives. Illogical. Hey, what's 2 plus 2? 5. Great. Keeping it on the positive today. Okay? If they do the wrong thing, good instruction means they need to be corrected and told that was not right. So, you must respond when they do it incorrectly. The question is how to respond. What we know is that if a brand new teacher or an inexperienced teacher is confronted with a typical misbehavior, the number one, first and foremost response is, get out. The problem is, we don't have a single study anywhere in the world that says removing a kid from the classroom or school will change their behavior. As I've said earlier, there are times and there are kids that need to be removed. But if that removal is simply to teach them a lesson, it's not teaching them the lesson you think it is. If you want to predict what will happen next from a kid who's been excluded, the highest probability from a kid who's been excluded once is another exclusion. Again, I'm not saying it should never happen, because it needs to happen for safety reasons and when it's too disruptive for others to learn, etc. But just that you brought food today, get out. If that's where we go with it, it's very ineffective, and in fact, it's counterproductive if you look at the probabilities with it. So, we have to figure out how to respond to kids that are doing things that are not what we want. And here's a really complicated looking example from a high school in Maryland. So they came up with this. Very simply, what it says is, I saw a problem behavior. I talked to the student about it. Now I have to ask myself, should I send this kid to the office or not? And they've decided these things go to the office. These things do not. Okay, they've also added, make this more complicated, but if I've seen them do this thing 3 times in a row for the same thing, then they do. Okay, it gets a little complicated, but this is the part I think is important. When you get your whole faculty together, you need to go through this list and ask, what are some good strategies for that? And let your experienced teachers tell what they do so that your inexperienced teachers get it and go, oh, there is a set of things I've got besides throw them out. Because a lot of people, honestly, when you say, handle these yourselves, there are people saying, handle food and drink myself? I've always sent them to the office for that. I don't know what else I've got. And there's great data out there that shows the progression of things people select. When going to the office isn't available, sitting in the hall becomes the next one. Or sitting in the back corner, it's exclusion, exclusion, instead of, here's a way to handle that. The ways to handle it are numerous. It depends on your kids, how old they are, what's their background, etc. So ask your school to sit down and have a conversation about what are the appropriate ways to handle it in our school when these things happen. There shouldn't be just one thing for each of them. It depends. Who was the kid? How did it happen? But what would make sense for you in handling that particular thing? We're getting now to box 4. Box 4 is, what will we do to collect data so that we'll know if this is working? 3 things to think about when you think about the thermometer on the forehead for the kids in your school. 1, do we all agree on what the behaviors are? Does everybody in your school agree what a fight is? Some people think there must be blood in order to call it a fight. Some people think if you look at someone mean, that's a fight. We have to agree. Otherwise, our data is meaningless. 2nd, everything we do to collect data, everything, has to take less than 1% of your time, or it's unrealistic. We're not doing giant universal screening systems. We're putting a thing on your forehead so you can look. It's got to be that simple. And lastly, whatever data you collect has to be shown back to the faculty and useful. Otherwise, why are we collecting data that nobody's even looking at? This is my favorite form of all time. This is the size of the palm of my hand. It's this big. It's a front and back, and it's on a little tablet. Every adult in this school, this is in Fairfax, Virginia, every adult in this school carries one in their pocket. This is not a punishment. Nobody says, you just earned a yellow slip. It's data. I deal with a kid. After I'm done dealing with a kid, I fill out the slip. It can be one of 2 things. 1, a report means this wasn't an office referral, I dealt with it myself. And people sometimes ask, why would I bother filling out a slip for problem behavior if I didn't send them to the office? Here's the answer. Because if it's a big enough problem for you to have had to deal with, it's a problem. If I had one problem with 20 of you, you're all thinking of a kid with one problem. I'm a kid with 20 problems. If we're tracking those, you're going to find kids when their snowballs are just starting to roll. If you're going to wait and only look at kids that have had 10 major problems, you're only working on kids whose snowballs are more than halfway down the hill already. Too late. So we're looking to track simple things and big things. And we can put this all in a database. So if I were to do this every time I had a problem and then I threw this in a box in the office sometime that week, at the end of the week I could tell you everything that happened. This is kind of an old example, but these are kids that had problems this week. I can tell you who they were, what they did, when it happened, where it happened, and anything else you want to know. This is simply put into an Excel worksheet. Most of our schools have a system. In Kentucky, Infinite Campus, every school uses, and so you can do it in Infinite Campus. The Swiss system is one that people use, but any system you use to put data in, you can do this with. Now, what this will also allow me to do is then alphabetize it and find my repeat offenders. Tanya has been a repeat offender for me. I can now pull Tanya's data out, and I can tell you when Tanya had problems, where Tanya had problems, and anything else we want to know about Tanya. If Tanya's mom comes in, we can have a very specific conversation. I can find not only kids that are having problems, but I can tell you when and where and why. That allows me a lot more leeway. Now here's what I want to do with that data. I want to, once a month, get my PBIS team together and look at it. And I'm going to say what's going on in our school. This will be shared back with the rest of the school. So the first thing we do is we look and we say, what goals did we have? And let's say that we said we wanted our tardies to go down. Where were they last month? They were at 25. Where are they this month? 32. Is it working? No. The things we decided to do, either we're not doing or they're not working. The first question I always ask is, are we doing that stuff? And everybody should say, yeah, I've seen the people in my group stand in the hall and say those things to kids. Okay, well, that's just not working. We're going to have to do something different or something more. If it's not working, we change. But this lets us get a good picture of what are the things we need to focus on. Tardy is obviously the thing to focus on because it's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. When I see schools that have poor definitions, I had a school that had 4 things that I think were the same. Not following directions, insubordination, noncompliance, and defiance. And I would say, those are all the same thing. No. Okay, tell me what they are. And everybody give me definitions. Like, yeah, you just said the same thing. All you're really doing is taking something this big and obfuscating it. Nobody sees that it's a bigger... Have fewer categories rather than, let's have fight with fists and fight with feet. Let's have fight with... No, just have fight. Make your categories simple and big. Don't try to have too many. This is the reason I show this example is because I think it's ridiculous. This is a school that has categories on their data for weapons, bombs, arson. And I always say, if you need data to keep track of the bombings in your school, PBIS is probably the least of your concerns right now. I would have a category called Other. I mean, if someone checks bombs, I'm going to want to know more. So just put Other and you can tell me more. Make it so that when you look at that data, you see the 5 or 6 categories that make sense to you. Don't try to cover every possible thing because it's just more work than it's necessary. This data would tell you when. Now, if this is my school, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say 12:30, pull that data out. Where at 12:30? What problem at 12:30? Is it a predictable group of kids at 12:30? And it's all in the data. When you sort and filter this in Excel, I can tell you what time of day on a Thursday would an 8th grader be most likely to have a misbehavior. It's predictable if you can pull it apart and tell me who, what, when, where, why. But if the data's there, you can do that. If the data's not there, you don't have that ability. The average school will have more problems in the classroom than other places. But when schools start collecting data, they see that and think, oh my God, our classrooms are out of control. They might be, but it's normal for you to have higher from the classroom because kids spend most of their time there. So it's good data. What I would want to do is pull out classroom and say, what time of day in the classroom? Which kids from the classroom? What are the behaviors that kids are getting moved out of the classroom for? What could we do to teach and change things to make that work better for us? Or maybe there's a grade level here that needs more support from us. Or maybe it's even a classroom. How did those 3 kids end up in the same classroom? We need to support that in some way. And then finally here you can look at finding kids. This data doesn't show kids that got 0 office discipline referrals, so that's why the green is so small. But a lot of times people will say, well, it doesn't really matter about these only got 1 problem kids. And I think it does, because every one of these kids that only had 1 problem, find out what that problem is. Because I will bet you that kid number 11 here has had that problem 50 times. The thing that the average kid gets tripped up on just once are the things that a lot of these 2 and 3 and 4 kids have done multiple times. Those are things to give you a quick fix, to give you a bigger burst. You don't need PBIS to find kid 11. Kid 11 will find you. I'm really interested here in who, what, when, where, and why, so we can apply tier 2 interventions of some sort. What extra things need to happen based upon who, what, when, where, why there. And all of these kids are going to need intensive interventions, but again, you don't really need PBIS to find those kids. They'll be obvious. Those are the kids we're trying to prevent. But we are going to need to do individualized interventions with them. Then the last thing I like to do is put it up, make it public so everybody can see it. This is what you told us. You filled out those little slips and you threw them in a box and we put them in a graph. We sat down with a team and we looked at it, and here's what we noticed. It's working really well here, it's not working here. Show them to everybody and then post them. Put them by the mailboxes, put them in the faculty lounge, put them somewhere where people can go in and look. One, they get a chance to see where it's working and not, what we're doing. It also reinforces the fact that they're collecting data. That's why I fill out those slips, so you'll know this is what's going on. So let's say that I come into the faculty meeting and I yell, you know what? Where's that PBIS team? We need to have 2 extra adults standing outside of my room at 1 o'clock every day because there's a bunch of kids making noise. So I demand we have more support outside my room. Here's what the PBIS team should do. They should say, let's see, 1 o'clock, hallway. We don't have any problems in the hallway at 1 o'clock. The only way we're going to know something's happening is if you give us data. Remember, people don't make us change. Data makes us change. So only the data drives how we make those decisions about what's going on. We must have data or we don't know what's going on. So in a nutshell, that's PBIS. You use the data here to make decisions about preventing what you've just found, which takes you back to box 1, and you run through it again. At what point does this stop? Never. You just keep doing this every month, and hopefully it's working well and things, but I can tell you what happens. As the year goes by, kids get weird. And they start doing things we never thought of, but the data will show you. What the hell is going on at 2 o'clock? Yeah, this is a new one. Okay, then let's develop a new thing for it and put that in place and measure that. It never works that it's just the same exact goals, the same exact thing. New kids, new teachers, new things. It's something that is continuous. On a monthly basis, we look at data and make decisions about how could we make more kids successful. Are there any questions about PBIS?